Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Tamara Thorpe. I am best known as the Millennials Mentor and the founder of Real Mentors Network. And I've also been the host of the Making Connections podcast. I am here as our host for MELD, which is the Mentoring Ecosystems for Learning and Development. This is a series of learning forums that brings together UNM Mentoring Institute, the Center for the Improvement of Mentored Experiences and Research, also known as CIMMER, and the International Mentoring Association to explore how mentoring ecosystems expand access, elevate quality, and drive impact. So, as many of you know, today's session is going to focus on inclusion. So, in our learning series, we're moving from aspiration to application. So, can you, in one word in the chat, tell us what makes mentoring feel inclusive? Let us know in the chat what makes mentoring feel inclusive. Impact, understanding, validation, when it's transparent and accountable caring, the whole person, shifting perspectives, acknowledgement of our differences, empathy, good listening, reciprocity, accessible, trust, awareness. So we're seeing some themes for sure around trust and listening, acceptance and acknowledgement. These seem to be some themes coming up, and feeling safe, vulnerability, right? That ties into that being able to be your whole person, that vulnerability, acceptance, the transparency. Outstanding. Thank you all for sharing. And if more is coming and you're still writing yours, please put it in the chat. I know our panel is soaking all of this in. So today's session is going to look at recognizing
Linda, somebody in there.
diversity and mentoring needs, how we design inclusive mentoring approaches, and assess impact of bias on mentoring outcomes. This is what we're going to focus on today. Today, our panel is really looking forward to sharing their insights and engaging with all of you. So we will be taking questions as we go. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll keep an eye and make sure they get over to our speakers if they don't catch them. And then also, because we're on Zoom, please keep track of your mute. And when we invite questions, we'll invite you to come off mute. Otherwise, make sure that you're on mute. And if you are able to be on camera today, we would love to have you on camera so that we can see you. I know our panel had a request to specifically be able to see folks. So if you can, we appreciate you being on camera. This is a pet and partner friendly zone, so don't worry if you've got things going on in your background. We will all be in awe and acceptance. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, and we will start with our first panelist. Stacy, over to you.
Hi, thanks so much for the intro. And let me say, survivor of the blizzard of 2026 here in Boston. And so I'm delighted to be here. I'm a professor at Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College. And one of the reasons I'm excited to be here is because the study and the research of mentoring has been something that I've been doing since about 1996, maybe before that, 1990. So over 3 decades of real care and concern about this. And I'm really excited about sharing both my research, but also my expertise in practicing mentoring. I'm right here with you. I'm really excited.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Angela, an introduction.
Good morning, Angela Byars-Winston from University of Wisconsin-Madison. I am a professor in the Department of Medicine and part of the CIMMER group, and I am so honored to be included in this amazing panel. I'm officially a fan club of Brad and Stacy and looking forward to rich conversations. My passion has really been looking at diversity science applied to mentorship and career development and professional development. I'm looking forward to some brave conversations around the term inclusive. It feels good to be able to say that word in a group of friends given the historical moment. And I'm looking forward to pushing a few envelopes of conversations today.
Thank you so much, Angela. And over to you, Brad.
Hey, good to be with all of you. And I know that I have, excuse me, cited Stacy and Angela quite a bit in my own work. Excuse me. And it's such a delight to be on a panel with them. So good to be with all of you. I have recently stepped away as a professor of clinical psychology after a full career at the U.S. Naval Academy so that I can focus more on my writing and research, especially around gender fairness in the workplace and how equitable relationships feed into that. So, mentoring, sponsoring, that's really what I've been up to. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And I am going to get us started because I know folks are here for the conversation. So, Stacy, let's start with you. How do identity and lived experiences shape what people need from mentoring?
So thanks for the start. As I shared with my colleagues, I've been thinking about this since I got the invitation and since I'm sitting with the questions, and I was sharing with Brad and Angela and our whole group how excited I was about this. And so in terms of the question that you've asked, where I really saw identity and mentoring come together was through the concept of intersectionality. So that when we show up as more than one dimension. You know what this really became true for me was in my research looking in India. I taught at a business school in India. I taught a class on gender in a business school in India, and it was phenomenal, right? But the thing that I found is that the experiences of professional Indian women who were coming to my office to ask me questions about what does it mean to be mentored, and what does it mean that I'm not even supposed to be in school, or that I'm supposed to be having a child, and the child has to be a son, and the son has to be firstborn, and all these different expectations that were held of women in India, in contrast with what's held here. Of course, some similarity, but the differences of this intersectionality really, really impacted their careers. And it started a kind of stream of research for me that looked at mentoring across dimensions of national identity.
Okay. So I'll ask you to the rest of the panel, what do mentors most often miss when they assume needs are universal, right? Stacy just said, clearly and really well articulated, noticing this intersectionality and differences between these two communities. So what do mentors most often miss when they assume needs are universal?
I want to jump back in, but I also want to give my colleagues a chance to speak because I'm just brimming over with things. And so I'm going to and let Angela and Brad jump in.
Well, I'm going to jump in really quickly because I'm unmuted and just follow on your theme, actually, Stacy, and bring it into the work that I do around cross-gender mentoring in the workplace. And here's what I'm concerned, especially men are going to miss when they assume that all women have the same experience in the workplace, which they do often. I often see men missing the intersections around race and gender. And I'll just refer quickly to the McKinsey research on women of color in the workplace, which came out a couple of years ago and revealed that women of color, compared to their white female colleagues, have far fewer informal interactions with people in leadership. They have far fewer what I would think of as kind of mentor of the moment exchanges with people who could become mentors or sponsors. They often report feeling invisible. They report double jeopardy, working twice as hard to get half as far. If I assume that all women are having the same experience in the workplace or in our graduate program, there's a really good chance I'm going to miss it and not be as effective as I could be across intersectional difference.
And I'll just add to these great comments. We miss out on the data we need to be effective. If we think about mentorship as an evidence-based professional practice, we need data so that we know where to shoot the arrow. And so one of the things I'm aware of as I'm working on a project now in a business school on this idea of inclusive leadership. And that's what the business school dean I'm working with has been saying. How do we help our students understand, specifically undergraduate students, why they should lean into inclusivity as a leader and have that be one of the markers? And we've been focusing on this concept from social psychology called optimal distinctiveness theory. And it's the concept that all of us want to both be a part of a group, but also want to be recognized for our individual differences. And holding that tension together as a mentor to say there are some universal practices, right? You think about the Simmer group, entering mentoring, entering research has identified competencies that are universally acceptable and effective for all practice. And then you got to have this little lens where it zooms in on the individual of Angela. How does me being, if you're going to mentor me in the Department of Medicine, where I'm the only tenured Black female in a department of 200 faculty who are mainly MDs, and I'm a PhD, and you're mentoring me, what kind of data do you need to be effective in supporting my professional and career development? So you miss the data needed to know how to optimize the activities that you use in your mentorship.
Can I add one thing to that, building on what Brad and Angela said in terms of some similarity and attraction theory, so that we know we go to what we're comfortable with, in terms of the assumptions that we make, that we understand what's going on for everybody else. Something else that I've seen, and this is working across MBAs, across undergraduates, and mostly with executives, is that there can be a lack of self-awareness. And when we come in assuming that we know everything, this lack of self-awareness, the lack of being able to sit down with yourself and say, hey, wait a minute, maybe I am making assumptions, or maybe all of this is something there that, that lack of self-awareness, I believe, is critical in terms of what might mentors miss.
Excellent. Interesting. Really interesting. So then what behavioral markers, Angela, I'll direct this to you. What behavioral markers tell us mentoring is equitable?
I'll start off with two. I'm thinking about mindsets that allow markers of effective mentorship to be inclusive. One is that the mentorship is proactive. We're not waiting for data to come to us. We're not waiting for the mentee to bring up questions around inclusivity, their specific lived identity and experiences that would be useful to know as I mentor them. And we're also, another marker is that we're making the implicit explicit. And the work that we've been doing through Simmer and the Culturally Aware Mentorship Initiative in particular, we have been focusing on ways, as Stacy mentioned, to help mentors build their muscle to lean into the discomfort, the unknown of asking a question like to a mentee, what would be helpful for me to know about your lived experiences to be effective with you? And we hear some mentors saying, gosh, what if I ask the question and they actually answer? What do I do? Right? And so we got to build the stamina. Different psychologists, like folk who've been looking at diversity issues, talk about building, and my interests were specifically looking at mentorship around race ethnicity. And they talk about building the muscle for race talk, the ability to be comfortable to have conversations that are explicitly salient about race ethnicity. So some markers are that they're proactive, the mentorship is proactive, and it makes the implicit, like power dynamics, relationship building, etc., makes those things explicit.
Do you mind if I jump in, Brett? Okay, so it's actually building what Angela said in terms of looking at a mindset. And so as an organizational behavior, so I always kind of want to know what are the context, what are the conditions that will support mentors in doing this. And so it's really interesting work by Mary Murphy, takes mindset from individual level of looking at growth versus fixed mindset, and she applies it to organizations. And so what's the type of organization that will be encouraging of mentoring? She talks about a organizational culture of growth versus an organizational culture of genius, and that organizational cultures that promote growth will provide the context and the support and the reinforcement to support mentoring, and because it won't be seen as something that extra to do, something that that you're nice if you do this, is actually part of the culture to support mentoring. And so it builds right on what Angela's talking about in terms of mindset, both at the individual level and as an organizational behaviorist at the organizational level too.
Thank you both for saying that. So now it's got me thinking. I'm also in the middle of building something around behaviors for a client. And so, Angela, what you're talking about is mentors having the skill set to be responsive to a need that a mentee may say that they have. And Stacy, you're talking about the that happens, right? Those skills are acquired within an organization that has a culture that is supporting that type of skill development, that type of need. And so, Brad, I direct the question to you because this really is about cultural humility or cultural competence or cultural intelligence or all any of the ways that we could name it. But it is that ability to behave in a way that fosters an inclusive culture and a supportive culture of mentoring, and one that a set of skills that equips a mentor to be able to be responsive when somebody says, I may have different needs because of my identity. So, how does cultural humility show up in a first mentoring conversation or in a mentoring relationship altogether?
Yeah. Yeah, I love the construct of cultural humility, and here are some of the things that for me would sort of load behaviorally on indicating somebody showing up that way. Number one, are you showing up with what I call spacious listening? Is this a superpower? Your ability to genuinely listen generously and really hear what your mentee is bringing into the room in terms of their lived experience. Do you show up with real curiosity? I think mentees pick up on this. This mentor is really interested in my lived experience, and they're communicating to me that they see me as the expert of my own cultural identities and lived experience. They don't try and impose assumptions on me about what my experience must have been or what I'm going to want in the workplace or in this mentoring relationship. So I love it when mentors show up with the listening, the curiosity, genuine authenticity. I want to go back to, I'm not sure if it was Stacy or Angela, but I love the idea of the ask to ask. Getting to the point where I say, I would be so interested in better understanding some of the experience or headwinds that you encounter in this education program or in our workplace, things that I, as maybe a senior white male, simply don't encounter and I might miss. I would really love to better understand that, especially if it would make me a better mentor for you and more aware. So the ask to ask, the beauty of that is, your mentee can decide whether or not they want to share that with you. But I have demonstrated some curiosity in simply asking that. And then finally, be careful, if we're talking about cultural humility, be careful about labeling the relationship. I would even be careful about that. So I may be in a room with this person. I don't know yet quite how they see our relationship or how they see me. So I'm not going to self-identify as their mentor. I think that comes with some power and a bit of presumptiveness. So I'd like to wait and let my mentee decide how they're going to see me and see this relationship.
Awesome. Thank you, Brad. Thank you. Stacy, do you want to add anything? I had a feeling.
Actually, yeah, there are actually a couple things that I was thinking about. And uh, so one of them is that as we think about mentoring, particularly across dimensions of difference, we tend to focus on what's visible, right? So race, gender, these different things. It's becoming more and more about what things aren't visible. And so I'm paying a lot of attention to neurodiversity, paying a lot of attention to other aspects of social identity that might be coming into play. And there is a kind of a curiosity, a willingness to ask questions, a willingness to be wrong at times, to understand that we might be making assumptions that don't actually show up or that we're imposing, we're putting on. Brad, when you were talking, it made me think about that in terms of, where we could think about this. Now, the other thing, I'd be curious from you, as we oftentimes think about mentoring from the mentor's perspective, I'm curious about when we get on the other side and we think about mentees and what is it that they need and what do they come to the table with. Brad gave such really exquisite, specific examples and dimensions of what would be a mentor, what we'd want to bring. I'm curious from you all, what do you think a mentee brings to the table, right? How do we, look at both sides? Angela's kind of comments really made me think about that. So, either to Brad or Angela or to anybody else, what do you think about this question that Tamara asked from the mentee's perspective?
So,
Angela, jump in.
Yeah, I thank you for raising this
Yeah.
interesting nexus of the bidirectionality, right, of this interpersonal exchange. And I want to reemphasize something I think that Stacy and Brad and I are saying about cultural humility, inclusive, effective practice. It's a posture. It's a way of being, not just a way of doing. And part of that way of being that I hear us saying that is relevant for both the mentor and the mentee is having this posture of curiosity about the other. It's like being a little anthropologist with a lowercase a. I don't want to offend any real anthropologists like Stephanie House, our colleague, if she's on the call, who actually studied this, but this healthy curiosity about the other. And in this way of being posture for me, it's really about noticing and paying attention to these opportunities in the mentoring relationship to call out and call in and draw out information from the other. Relative to the mentee, I hope that they understand the ways that perhaps the organizational demands I might have as a faculty member might shape how I can and when I can show up for them. And finding a way in the middle of that organizational demands that limit time and the number of roles I might play and what they need and how we can negotiate that somewhere in the middle. I think the last piece I'll just mention back to this piece about cultural humility, I really encourage us to read some work by Jonathan Cook. He defined cultural humility with 3 different factors, and we use cultural humility sometimes as kind of a blanket, and it actually has 3 facets to it. It's a helper variable. It's not the outcome in the mentoring relationship. So going back to posture, on both the mentor and the mentee side of culture humility, Jonathan Cook's work really helps us understand that there are things we can do, ways of being again, to show up both as mentors and mentees to make the mentoring relationship work.
Yeah. I think that's brilliant. I think the only 2 other quick things I might mention, Stacy, in response to your good question, is the reciprocity piece. If I'm thinking from a mentee perspective, a lot of mentees will say, I most value this mentoring relationship where I have a sense that my mentor is actually gaining something from our relationship, learning something, and they let me know that they're learning. They share what they appreciate. They share their epiphanies that might come from the relationship. That makes me feel more like a colleague, and it tends to level the playing field in the relationship. And then the other issue is just, I love it when a mentor doesn't try and clone me in their image. And I think there can be a little too much of that going on. I see it a lot in higher ed. I assume my mentees want to be just like me, and that is often not the case. So I know that mentees are appreciative when mentors are thoughtful about avoiding cloning.
If I could
thank
add a
you.
little bit more to
Oh,
that,
go
I'm
ahead,
sorry, can I?
Stacy.
So both Brad and Angela raised 2 points that I want to speak to. One is Angela talking about the either or, right? That we could be either this or either that, but actually that cultural curiosity has a kind of a spectrum. Well, lately in the research I've been seeing, it's belonging has that same kind of spectrum, right? So we can say we belong or not. That's not true, actually. Belonging is along a continuum. And there's a whole thing of really feeling there, all the way down to being forced to be there, all the way down to that of being exited, told to exit, exit. And mentoring plays a big role in this continuum of belonging. And that people, this is one of the biggest concepts in the management literature now of the importance of belonging. Well, mentoring can play a huge, huge, huge role in that, right? And so, and then Brad, you had me all excited, but I forgot the point. So I'll okay, because you
Uh,
had me excited.
So I want to answer your question because it also leads to a question that Jennifer Chandler has put in the chat. Because like, what does the mentee need? I think goes back to something Angela said is just because I might have a marginalized identity or I have aspects of my identity that are part of the dominant culture does not mean I'm skilled at having conversations around difference. Right. And so whether you're the mentor or mentee, there is a required sort of mindset that you all have talked about around reciprocity and humility. But there are a set of skills that are needed to have conversations about our similarities and differences. And that I think is really critical for both the mentee and the mentor, right? Like a mentor can't be aware and sensitive to someone's needs if they're unable to articulate them. So for me, I think that's a component, which leads into the question that Jennifer put in the chat that I think is an interesting one, because for me, I see this as the ally question. And what she wrote is, I'm wondering about mentors whose identity components, for the most part, locate them in majority groups, working with a mentee that they've been assigned, whose identity components also, for the most part, locate them in the majority groups. How does that mentor address issues of inclusion when they notice that the mentee doesn't have skills in inclusion? So I'm going to throw this to you, Brad.
Yeah, I can kick it off. I think it's a great question. I think there's so many things that I might do as a role model and a mentor here. I might just begin, I'll just offer one thing. I might begin with Socratic questions, as sometimes a form of confrontation. If I sense that a mentee is missing it on inclusion, making all kinds of assumptions, if there are biases, about people with marginalized identities. I love asking curious questions. Maybe it's in their research. I wonder if you thought about how you might disaggregate the data and look at the experiences of people who identify differently. Has that occurred to you? Or if I'm supervising a clinician, I wonder why that client of yours has not been very disclosive, and if you've examined how difference culturally might contribute to that and how you could mitigate that in your relationship. So I might just begin with those curious questions to try and pull this person along a bit.
I'll add, if I may, jump in here, building on your point, Brad. And again, thank you for that really thought-provoking question. And it raises something that my colleagues and I, working on the Culturally Aware Mentoring Initiative, have really been finding. Actually, many of our colleagues are wrestling with that, which is if we're both at least demographically and visible identities showing up as similar, in various dominant group identities, how do we introduce the notion of diversity and inclusion in those relationships? And one of the big findings that we have through that project is that the notion to emphasize that we all are cultural beings seems to be a good entree point for even colleagues who might have dominant group identity markers to notice and name out loud for the mentee, we are all cultural beings. And then that opens up this entree to discuss what is on the buffet of those identities. I'll give a quick example. My daughter, who demographically looks like me, dark-skinned Black woman, is at an HBCU. She wants to go to a predominantly white institution for graduate school. I would hope that the mentors who are working with her aren't just great for her when she's at Florida A&M University at HBCU, but at University of Wisconsin-Madison. I want my colleagues who might look like my dear friend Chris Funn on this call to be effectively able to navigate and negotiate a relationship with my daughter, the same way that if Chris and I both demographically look the same phenotypically, would be able to engage in cultural diversity conversations. So this notion, and I think the mentor having the opportunity to raise the point for their mentee that we are all cultural beings, and calling them into a conversation of what cultural identities give meaning to their life is a good breadcrumb trail to start from.
If I could add on to Angela's point. It's so nice. We didn't even plan this, how we interweave together. So don't even look behind the curtain. But Angela raises this point that leads into another aspect of what we might do, the great question that's asked here. And so I always think about, what about how mentors may use their networks, and they could come from any number of different places. And so I think about my own experience. So the research is very clear about looking at weak links and strong ties, right? And the power there of those things, and how a mentor could get you to different places by how they use their network. But just, I love Angela's giving a personal example. I'll share mine as well. As in grad school, I was 20 something. I just went straight to a PhD program, and I fell in love with the topic of mentoring very early in my PhD. And so I read and I wanted to meet the top scholars. And my mentor at the time at University of Michigan, Go Blue, was a Black man who was one of few at the University of Michigan's Business School. And I told him, I want to meet these two people, Kathy Cram and David Thomas. I want to meet them. And he said, okay, I'll introduce you to them. And I was like, oh, really? Get to my major conference, Academy of Management. I'm sitting right behind these scholars, the leading scholars. I'm trying not to faint because I am so excited. And then my mentor, Taylor Cox, says, oh, Stacy, let me introduce you to David Thomas and Kathy Cram, who in the management arena are superstars. And that was in 1990. And I still have very close relationships with them, because even though one was a white woman, one was a Black man in top business schools, very much one of few, they then use their network to, first of all, to see me and then to position me. And so I love, Angela, your point about we're all cultural beings. How can we support one another through how we use our networks, whether it's weak links or strong ties, right? So this networking literature really speaks to that.
Thank you all for such robust responses. And Stacy, you've triggered a Go Blue Wolverines response in the chat. You are among colleagues. So we're just coming off the thrills of International Women's Day. It's Women's History Month. So I'm gonna ask you, Brad, because you talked about this at the top of our session. And we know from the data that there is a huge gap for mentoring for women, particularly in the workplace. So why do some men, because we know that you can answer for all men, why do some men hesitate to mentor women, and what does research actually say?
Yeah. Yeah, such a great question. So, this is where my colleague Dave Smith and I spend most of our time, and we have done a deep dive into some of the factors that keep men on the sidelines when it comes to leaning into developmental relationships with women. And there are actually a host of things sometimes going on for men. Just number one, anxiety, right? I don't want to step in it, don't want to say the wrong thing, don't want to make a mistake. That makes me anxious. How about implicit bias, right? I may see women as wonderful. There's actually a stream of research called the Women Are Wonderful effect. Ask men, what do you think about women? You get all these nice responses like, oh, I love women. They're kind, they're caring, they're gentle. What you're not hearing is the agentic leadership language. And if you're not hearing that, and if I'm not thinking that about women, maybe I don't see them as, candidates for my time as a mentor, as a sponsor. Then Me Too comes along, right? And we were looking at research from Bloomberg and Lean In after Me Too, showing about 60% of men in America were saying, too dangerous, too risky to mentor women. I'm not going to do that. A lot of false narratives about what Me Too actually is about. Women would love to come to the workplace and not be assaulted or harassed. Really low bar for men. But instead of that, we hear these false narratives. I remind men a lot that the only cure for that, by the way, is exposure therapy, more engagement with women, more interaction, more conversations. There's homophily, and I think Angela or Stacy already referred to this, that we tend to naturally look for people who remind us of ourselves, and that's true around gender. So I might not even be aware until I do a careful audit about how many men versus women I'm mentoring. It just may not occur to me that I more naturally tend to do that. And then there are men who are unsure how to initiate the conversation, right? As funny as that may sound, I see these talented women, junior women, maybe they're students, maybe they're new employees. I know that I should offer a mentoring conversation, but I just don't know how to do that. So, I'll see men do awkward things like, I'd like to mentor you, right? Using their creepy voice like I just did. And that, of course, won't land well. So, sometimes we just got to work with men about how could you do this? Hey, Tamara, I saw you give that talk last week. I thought it was terrific. I was just thinking to myself, we're so lucky to have you here. I hope we can keep you on board. If you ever want to drop by and just talk about next steps in your career or your grad program, I've got an open door. Happy to chat. That's not a heavy lift, right? But sometimes we just need the language, we need the script for what that might look like.
Brad, I was kind of excited because what you talked about is being able to name something. And right, I don't know about you, but when I work with my students and I get a name, I give them a name for a concept, they just about go crazy. Well, what you're talking about in my arena is called protective hesitation. And it's when you hesitate to protect yourself, right? And you think you're doing it to protect the other person, but you really don't want to step in it. You don't want to make a mistake. And so this shield goes up and it's like, I'm gonna not do it because I want to protect you, but it's really not. Protective hesitation is about being afraid to step on it. On the other side is protective defensiveness, and that could be a whole subject by itself of how people will put up shells and walls around themselves to protect themselves. And mentees might do that, but mentors might as well. The challenge is that you have no communication, there are assumptions, and with the protective defensiveness, it's like I'm going to put a shell on myself to protect myself, but the shell gets so thick that no real information can come through. Okay, so protective hesitation, Brad, speaking to exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Protective defensiveness, not talked about so much, but equally important.
Yeah.
I really appreciate how you're raising things that we can then give name to because
Yeah.
naming is power.
I love the names I'm learning from you. So thank you, Stacy. Well, and excuse me, just to amplify that, um, I do see men occasionally assume that women need mentors who are women. And and this is the same around race. It's the the assumption that I have to have a same identity mentor, and I think we have to move beyond that. We have to help people see that actually, if we're talking about the corporate world, there are very few women in leadership, and so if you expect the few women you have in those positions to mentor all the junior women coming through the door, it's just not fair. It's a recipe for burnout for those women.
I just want to amplify what Brad and Stacy said and talk about the importance of communities of practice for mentors. Brad, you mentioned the notion of homophily, the fact that most of us, according to Pew Charitable Trust surveys, have demographic social networks that are pretty much like us. And which means we don't get a lot of opportunity to have cross-cultural engagement, again, to develop culturally relevant talk, language, broaching strategies for how to raise or introduce a topic. And Stacy, you mentioned the notion of protective hesitance, that we avoid gnarly topics, perhaps challenging topics, out of care for the person. We don't want to be offended, but we also don't know what to do. Like, this is a will skill gap. We have great intentions, but lack of competent strategies for how to act on those intentions. So I want to raise the importance of where communities of practice for mentors, not just training like entering mentoring, but spaces for faculty. I'll say, since I work with faculty, but mentors in general, to share and to learn together informally. I want to lift up some of the work, obviously, Melissa McDaniels is doing through the communities of practice in the clinical translational science award space, which is something that's available to everybody if you're interested. But one of the biggest things that we found is powerful as an activity or intervention in the culturally aware mentoring intervention was role plays. The faculty like, oh my gosh, I'm so offended. I'm a full faculty. What are you making me do a role play for? But we set them up in scenarios where they had to have 3 tries at a role play for broaching a racially salient conversation with mentees, excuse me. And it was the biggest, highest rated, well, the second highest rated impact of the intervention because faculty are like, finally, in a low stakes experience with my peers, I get to try on conversations. I get to try out new language, to navigate through that protective hesitance, to build cross-cultural interactions that reduce that homophily that we're all prone to. So communities of practice can be a space and a place where folk can just try out the wheels of a car like a test drive that's in a low stakes environment without just unleashing everything on the mentee to begin with. But thank you for raising that, Brad and Stacy, about the fact that we're often not doing the things that we know are effective for mentorship simply because we don't know how to, we haven't had experience, or we're afraid.
Thank you for that. I think what you all named, right, is the impact that affinity bias can have, right? When we want to, mentor somebody who reminds us of our younger selves or somebody we have an affiliation with, that creates a sense of familiarity. And that becoming a barrier to people to having access for mentors. That's what so much of my work is about, is making mentoring more accessible, because bias tends to be the sort of this gatekeeping aspect. One of the things that I want to note, because I hear you all talking about is the need for there to be skill building. And Angela, you're talking about skill practicing, right? We develop these skills through practice, and really needing and creating those spaces for mentors to be able to practice where it feels safe, but to come outside their comfort zone a little bit. And Jennifer added in the chat, right, being differentiating between the impact exposure can have versus the impact that real skill building can have, right? So exposure being an awareness first step, but that we're really talking about helping people develop the skills. We got a question from Etta that I want to add and put to the panelists. Etta wrote, I once did a simmer training and asked participants to reflect on diversity and its impact on the relationship, which always evokes great conversation. But during this session, there was an interest in exploring sameness. How has the scholarship around diversity and inclusion opened the door for a broader conversation around sameness as a powerful and intentional path toward effective mentorship practice?
I guess I would ask, and I can't wait to hear from Brad and Angela about what the sameness mean, right? So same around what dimension. And so I find that when I'm in a space, and we can talk about the research, I'm sure Brad and Angela would have that drawn from personal experience. What I'm drawn to, the sameness, depends, so on the context. And so when I'm in a different space, somebody who spent time in India and who has taught there or traveled there becomes this huge kind of source of attraction, and we can build on that. Our sameness in that particular dimension makes a difference. So the research, I really think about it from a management perspective. I'm interested in hearing from Brad and Angela about this and how sameness could not be seen as a possible challenge, but as an opportunity. That's what I hear from the questions. How is sameness an opportunity? And my question would be, what is sameness? But I'd love to hear from Brad and Angela.
Before Brad and Angela speak, Etta, do you want to clarify what you mean by sameness?
Yeah, this was a group that had majority white males in the room, very, very committed to the work, but just tripping all over themselves and maybe even causing harm in doing the work. And so the conversation came up about, is it important for us to mentor people that look like us? And then we can practice and make mistakes safely. And so Angela's last comment was kind of getting at this a little bit. But then there's also this idea of, folks having formal programs and wanting to automatically pair people together who are the same. And my experience has been the opposite when I pair people together who are different, but give them some guardrails. it seems to really generate innovation and excitement and new ways of, Angela's terms, doing and being in that relationship that really blossom.
That's interesting.
That's
I'm sorry, go ahead, Brad.
Oh, I was just going to say that's really helpful to hear that clarification, Etta, and good question. I think the only thought I have about this, you mentioned a room full of white men tripping all over themselves, and that's kind of my daily experience. You know, the work that Dave and I do around gender fairness in the workplace and male allyship for gender equity, we're often in the room with those majority men. And the value I see is sometimes, you know, if we're talking about, you know, Angela's idea of role playing and trying things out, sometimes it is lower stakes to try this out in an environment that feels familiar, it feels safe. I've got, you know, a mentor here perhaps, or somebody leading this session that feels same to me. I feel like there's a bit less risk, and so I do see that benefit. It also lets maybe the mentor in that situation do the kind of the developmental work that needs to be done around the mentee's awareness, around how they show up with people that have different identities. I can role model that a little bit. I can ask those Socratic questions. I can do the carefrontation if they're getting off the rails or missing something. So it does the sameness might be a nice starting place at times when we're trying to move the needle on this topic, but that's what comes to mind for me.
I mean, what comes to mind for me is again the question I had about sameness. So, Eddie, your clarification, as Brad said, is very, very helpful. I've done a lot of work with formal mentoring programs, and my goodness, there can be so much opportunity to go off the trail as Brad. How do we have the guardrails that are there, right? And so, so starting from a place of sameness may be particularly helpful, but it could be the sameness around the goal. What are the goals of the institution, and how do we have similarity there? So I keep coming back to this sameness, and what do I mean by sameness, which to me provides phenomenal opportunity, but also real challenge, because what I've seen is that formal mentoring programs that don't do well do harm. Right? I mean, they literally can be harmful. And so Brad's point about, you know, how do we do this? And then Angela, you know, us talking about the guardrails, really important. So I just would keep pushing on what do we mean by sameness? I think that's a great question. And what do we mean by that?
If I may build on Brad and Stacy's wealth of observations about what sameness is a proxy for and the perceived, perhaps, comfort, I'll suggest that for some of our mentors, it's just easier, right? Like assimilation theory. It's like, it's just easier for me to like the clone effect. It's just easier for me to mentor someone like me. And so I want to encourage those faculty to follow the data. The data suggests that sameness, and some of this work has been done by Stacy and Brad, sameness factors are great for starting a mentoring relationship. That is, their empirical effect is greatest at the initiation of the mentorship. Because we're talking about, we both like soccer, we both like paella, we both like to travel to Italy. But the data do not suggest that sameness factors predict the longer term outcomes of mentorship, like career satisfaction, persistence to degree. And so it's actually those deep level characteristics like sameness, as Stacy said, on values, sameness on goals that would help us get to the desired outcomes from an empirical perspective. So I think it's important when we hear some mentors just like, shouldn't we lean into sameness? All this diversity talk is really good, but maybe sameness should be also lifted up. Follow the data. The data suggests it's useful, but it's not everything. Necessary, but not everything for longer term impact of the effectiveness of mentorship.
Thank you for that rich conversation. We're getting close to the end of our hour, so I have a final question to each of you. If you're a leader listening today, what is one thing you would examine tomorrow to determine whether mentoring is truly inclusive? And let's start with Stacy.
All right. So again, as an organizational behavior, so I look at processes. And the question that I would ask is who's coming in the door, right? Who's even being brought to the table in order to be there to impact and have the impact of mentoring. We know with the latest research on AI that who gets in the door is starting to become even more challenging. How the right words in your resume are all these different things that are shutting the door before even people get there. So I do want to think about inclusive practices as who gets in the door, who's even invited to the table, and that as an organizational level impact. I'm always looking at micro, meso, macro, that paying attention to leaders, who gets in the door to even be at the table to have access.
I think that, boy, one thing that's a tough one. There's so many things I would recommend, but number one, I guess my number one thing is, and I'm gonna call out Angela. This has been her mantra today. Look at the data. And I'll just give you an illustration about why this matters. I was involved in a study many years ago looking at psychology doctoral programs. And so we surveyed all the training directors and asked, how many of your doctoral students are being mentored? And the response was something like 82%. Oh yeah, 82% of our students are being mentored. Then we surveyed those students, and it was about 45% from their perspective. And the error that often managers or leaders are making is to assume that if somebody's paired with an advisor or, paired with a manager in a workplace, surely they must be getting mentored. And that's often not the case from a mentee's perspective. And then, even there, you've got to disaggregate the data and look at the experience of people who identify differently. And I'm guessing you'll see big deltas on the part of people with minoritized identities compared to their majority counterparts. So look at the data. Don't assume that because you have done some sort of superficial pairing when people walk in the door, that they're having a good developmental relationship experience.
Thank you, Brad. I'm actually going to just build on that because that's me. I'm going to say follow the data and actually conduct some interesting evaluations qualitatively or quantitatively about what the data could tell us. And I'm going to give two examples. Stacy mentioned David Thomas, as you said, giant in the organizational behavior literature, former president of Morehouse College, just an amazing scholar. And one of his classic papers looked at the relationship of mentoring that was culturally relevant for Black mid-level managers in corporate America and how it connected to outcomes. And what he found is that mentoring for those groups, Black folk in those professional spaces who had mentoring that addressed race, that acknowledged that race as a factor in their career development as they navigated progression in their organization, got promoted faster and farther than those who had mentors who did not explicitly address race. That's one thing that our data could tell us if you're in corporate America or in working with mentors who mentor professionals. How does their mentoring connect to desired outcomes from the data? I'll give another example in higher education at Vanderbilt University. Roger Chalkley, who was Associate Dean for Graduate Education for a long time in the basic sciences, did an evaluation of pre-doctoral students in the biomedical sciences and their satisfaction with mentorship and time to degree. And what he found is that those who had higher satisfaction with their mentoring finished their degrees sooner. You got through the degree faster. We included that in the National Academy's report on the science of effective mentorship in 2019 if you want to see more of that data. But following the data to help us understand what does satisfaction or culturally relevant mentoring, effective mentors who have been trained versus those who have not, shout out to the work that Chris Fun and colleagues have done, how that's connected to the desired outcomes would give us more information. And why is that important? In the mentorship education work that we've been doing through SIMR, what we find, especially for faculty who are mentors in higher education, they are empiricists. Whether you're in the arts and humanities or you're in the basic sciences, they want to know, if I'm going to show up for 8 or 10 hours of training, if I'm going to go to this community of practice, if I'm going to come to this MELD workshop, what is the value added to me in my practice? And if we can show data, not just from these great cited peer-reviewed articles that all of us on this call are reading or doing, but from locally harvested data. Locally harvested data moves people sometimes more than these great peer-reviewed articles, because folk have a tendency, whether you're in corporate America or in higher education, to say, oh, not in my backyard. We do great mentoring here. We don't have that problem at the U.S. Naval Academy. But when you get those data and Brad and Dave show, this is actually what it looks like here at the USNA, it's hard to resist. And it also appeals, I believe, as a psychologist, to the altruistic motivations that most of us have. We don't want to hurt people. Most of the mentors I work with, they really want to be good and they really care about their trainees. So if we can show the ROI, or the return on the investment, of this professional development, showing up this webinar, coming to mentorship education, of how it's going to move the needle in our local data set, people are more engaged.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We're moving into our closing. So we want to pose this question to folks in the audience. What's one inclusive mentoring behavior you can practice this month? And a quick lightning round to Stacy, Brad, and Angela. What's one behavior a mentor can adopt immediately? Lightning round.
I'd say sit with yourself, really sit with yourself and be willing to do the work. All of these things that I heard from my colleagues was, so exciting. Sit with yourself.
Sit with yourself.
How about show up as a mentor of the moment? Just be that person who stops for a couple of minutes and checks in with new students or new faculty or new employees. Don't wait till you're paired. Be the mentor of the moment person.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. We see folks are posting into the chat. And also what you're saying, Brad, resonates with what Bruce talked about last month about listening and being present, right? So there's a listening to yourself and that self-awareness that Stacy and Angela are reinforcing, and then, making yourself available. We see some great commitments to action coming into the chat here. Things that folks are going to do. I certainly know that I was like, I need to read more. So I don't know where I'm going to find the time, but I'm feeling a lot more inspired to catch up on my reading and research after listening to all of you, because so much of what you shared connected with the work that I do. And it was such a very, very rich conversation. So thank you so much, Brad, Stacy, and Angela, for being available, sharing your wisdom and experience and expertise. I know I found it extremely enriching. Tomorrow, all of you will receive a brief survey, so we invite you all to take the time to respond. Your insights help us to continue to grow and deliver sessions that are meaningful and have impact. I know also our team has put some links in the chat for Dr. Byars-Winston's keynote, to register for the upcoming MELD Forum, and to share any interest you might have in contributing to the MELD sessions. We know that we have an incredible audience of experts here, so we invite your expertise as well. Thank you all again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next month, and the links have been put back into the chat again if you'd like to click and sign up. I think we're going to have some incredible conversations next month. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your week, and thank you again to all of you for attending and to our panelists.